Hello everyone, and welcome to our joint webcast with CA and Sandhill on the topic of model-driven data governance and the CA ERwin Web Portal. As mentioned in the invite, the Data Management Maturity Model, DMM, from the CMMI Institute has identified metadata management as one of the major factors required to support a data governance program. Data modeling tools such as CA ERwin, which can take the technical metadata harvested from these models and provide connectivity from businesses to technical domains. Sandhill Consultants and CA will provide a unique perspective on the following key points: the CMMI-DMM data governance model, the components of technical metadata, and how tools such as the ERwin CA Data Modeler and Web Portal can help us with data lineage and traceability. I will be introducing our three presenters shortly who will be speaking on today's webcast, but first, here are a few housekeeping notes. This webcast is being recorded and will be sent. We will be sending out the recording link and the PowerPoints to the attendees in the coming days. In addition, if any attendee has any questions, please use the dialog box to submit questions. At the end of the webcast, we will do our best to answer them, but we'll also include answers to all questions and follow-up communications. So with that, let me introduce the speakers. We've got Darius Tantanella, who is a contractor for CA for Canada. Don Soulsby is the Vice President for Architecture Strategies with Sandhill. And Casey Gavouche is the Principal Consultant for CA, who will be doing the technical demo at the end of the presentation. So with that, Don, let's go ahead and kick off the first slide and introduce Sandhill Consultants for people who don't know us. Sandhill Consultants is a group of people, process, and architectures that helps clients build comprehensive data architectures, resulting in a persistent data management process, and founded on a robust data governance practice. And on the left, right-hand side, you can see that we've got a foundation of modeling technologies built on the capability maturity model and the major sections within the data maturity model. We'll be talking about that as we go into it. And of course, we obviously our goal is to help our organization deliver trusted, verifiable data to the organization. So with that, I'd like to introduce Darius from CA to kick off the presentation. Darius.
All right, thanks, Robert. So in today's information-driven economy, data-centric initiatives such as data governance and business intelligence are at the forefront of many organizations' strategic priorities. So we at CA Technologies, we understand that data runs your business, whether it's making strategic decisions based on quality information or making data management more efficient to save time and cost. So CA ERwin plays a critical role at the center of these initiatives, providing a collaborative data modeling environment that's going to help you ensure that your data is managed more efficiently and with higher quality. So by using CA ERwin as a common reference point for your core data assets, data definitions can be reused across projects. This will eliminate silos of information and increase information sharing and reuse. So for example, once definitions for customer data are defined and validated from a business perspective and created for an application development project, the same metadata can be used to jumpstart a new data warehouse, BI, or data governance initiative. The same definitions can be reused, saving time and money by not reinventing the wheel, and of course reducing your rework. So Don, if you can go on to the next slide. Now, by using a design and build tool like CA ERwin Data Modeler as the center of your data management initiatives, customers are going to be able to build a single consistent view of their information architecture from a variety of data sources shared with a variety of departments, geographies, and roles. So starting with the lower left object and diagram here, ERwin's able to help you obtain a central view of all your data stores populated by the many relational database vendor products which are supported out of the box by ERwin Data Modeler. In addition, we also support the SQL Azure platform, which is for, of course, cloud-based data modeling. Looking at the upper left object, typical organizations have their metadata in spreadsheets, BI, ETL, and big data tools. So ERwin has built in over 120 import and export bridges that will integrate your metadata to and from these vendor products so that the definitions created in ERwin can be easily shared across your other vendor products that store your metadata. Now moving to the upper right side of the diagram, in addition to the numerous technical details to manage, your metadata is communicated across numerous roles and geographies across the organization. Now this information needs to be accessible to other department personnel from functional business, data governance, and other functional areas throughout your organization. Now finally, moving to the lower right, this identifies your business sponsors, developers, data architects, and others who are going to need access to this information. To communicate the information, ERwin has a number of ways to communicate and share to various roles within your organization by generating reports natively and publishing via Excel, HTML, or PDF. In addition, ERwin has the ability to present this information in a simple, customizable, web-based interface, which is going to be suitable for both your technical and business users within your organization through the ERwin Web Portal. And Don, if you can go to the next slide. Okay. So CA ERwin provides a collaborative data modeling environment, which is going to help you manage enterprise data through an intuitive graphical interface with a centralized view of key data definitions. So you're able to have a better understanding of your corporate data managed in a more efficient and, of course, cost-effective way. Beginning on the left, CA ERwin Standard Edition is a client that is used to design and create database structures with visual models, document business terms, align your business rules with technical implementation. Then moving to the middle piece, here we're talking about CA ERwin Workgroup Edition. So this includes the data modeler, which also adds a MART server, which is comprised of a 3-tier architecture. So now core data definitions created in the Standard Edition can be stored in the central repository or MART, reusing core assets to increase efficiency and quality. In addition, the MART automates version control, assisting with streamlining change management and development. You also have the ability to do cross-model reporting in the MART utilizing the report designer. And then finally, moving to the right, we have our govern and share capabilities. So once your data assets are stored and rationalized in that common repository, they can now be shared across the organization to a variety of roles by using the intuitive ERwin Web Portal, as well as other publishing and export mechanisms within the CA ERwin Data Modeler. And before I turn over to Don, I wanted to add the latest addition to the ERwin Web Portal is our Data Governance Edition, and that's going to add data governance metadata authoring tools, a business glossary, semantic mapper, data documenter, and a data mapper. So Don, that's it for me, and you can go ahead and take it from here.
Yeah, Darius.
No problem.
So who am I? As Robert mentioned, I'm the VP of Architecture Strategies for Sandhill, and very recently I have passed my accreditation to become an enterprise data management expert from the CMMI. And my background is in enterprise architecture, business intelligence, and certainly metadata. And as well, I've been a data and process modeler for a lot of years and do a bunch of speaking and education. I consider myself a meta-write. My family were shipbuilders from Scotland, and they were shipwrights. So I construct abstractions for a living, so I call myself a meta-write. Let's take a look quickly at what the problem is that we're trying to deal with, because we always hear that business and IT have this problem communicating, and we don't actually seem to understand what each other are talking about. And I think it's more organizational, more than just organizationally. I think some of it has to deal with how we look at solving a problem. Many organizations, since this seminal book by Alfred Chandler, talk about building organization structures that are very much in line with the strategy of the company. Unfortunately, most of the way systems have been built over the years follows more of a traditional architecture perspective, and Louis Sullivan, of course, famous architect, had said that form follows function. So as we started to look at something, a building, an object, or a database, frankly, we look on its intended function or purpose, which in this case was very much process-oriented or service-oriented, and what we ended up doing was building data around the ings of the company which effectively were the organizational structures that created marketing, accounting, and so on and so forth. So the fundamental issue now is between business and technology is we have one set of drivers which is in somewhat state of flux as the strategies of the business change, and we have a rather fixed set of objects that have come from technology, which are effectively that process decomposition that created the databases. But unfortunately, the reality of the world today is that organizations need much more sets of cross-information rather than the information in the past that they actually owned. So what we're really looking for is this thing called a lingua franca, which goes back to medieval times where the Italians were looking at many different countries and working with them in terms of trade, but had to come up with a language to bridge the fact that they didn't exactly speak the same language. So in point of fact, what we are looking for in our world to try and marry the business strategies and goals with the technologies and the databases we have today is this thing of the trade language. And this is where we believe that the modeling tools are a very critical element to build that bridge. So let's look at the data management environment. And I'm sure you've seen one of these on a wall somewhere around your IT department that speaks to all the different applications that you have in your particular enterprise and how they're all cross-connected. Further to that now, of course, we're adding big data. So a lot of this is going into the data lake, and of course, a lot of it's going into the cloud. So it's gotten much more complicated over the years. And in point of fact, a building architect friend of mine refers to that diagram as a spaghetti diagram. Because in point of fact, when something has to change and you tug on one end, you're not entirely sure what's attached to the other end. So that's one of the critical issues. But the real problem is, after 30, 40 years of putting things into databases, we no longer have a filing problem. What we have is a finding problem. And that's the issue that we're trying to deal with this whole notion of data governance. So what is the issue? Well, do executives really trust their data? We've, of course, seen President Reagan, when he talked to Gorbachev, use the Russian term that said, trust yes but verify, recently respoken by the American president. But that is the whole point of trusting data, and certainly in a large respect means you can verify its structure, its content, and how good it is. In fact, the dictionary term of trust talks about the reliance on the integrity of a character or a person or a thing. And it's the word custody or stewardship. So now we're going from a situation where it used to be data ownership by those INGs, accounting, marketing, etc., to now being in a situation where we're putting somebody in trust of the data, and those would become our data stewards. So what does this trust mean? Well, certainly in a lot of respects it means gatekeeping. Security, obviously, these days has become a very prominent decision, but just as important is the notion of stewardship versus ownership, and because that information resource, its meaning, and the quality of it, it's got to span more than one organization. So as a result of that, frankly, we've created groups in a lot of organizations, whether it's under something called a Chief Data Officer or a Data Governance Council, is the notion of information accountability. I love a little cartoon from Doug Laney from Gartner, and Robin was saying basically it's all about big data. It's volume, velocity, variety, and veracity. And Batman's response is no, veracity, truth, and data, it's about all data, not just big data. And we do have a big problem with big data. So in the data management process, we have a bit of a problem because when somebody says who is or who are the data stewards, who is accountable for information, we run into a statement from the 17th century by a writer named Isaac Walton that says that which is everybody's business is nobody's business. So if you were asked somebody what is the business of data management and who is accountable, the point is it's mostly everybody in the organization that is accountable or responsible for data in some respect. And along claims a lovely lady named Clara Barton, yes, the founder of the Red Cross, who said, no, everybody's business, that is nobody's business, and nobody's business is my business. So in point of fact, as we start to look at this highly complex data management process, we really are talking about things that reach all across the organization, which is where the data maturity model comes in. CMMI Institute first announced in May 2014 and released last August, and which we had the first graduating class to which I was one of the enterprise data management experts, is to look at a very process orientation of what data management actually means. And of course, coming from the CMMI Institute, they've got many, many years of understanding how process matures and in how, in fact, you can increase the capability of a model. So when they looked at what data management meant, they come up basically with 6 process areas, of which they're data management strategy, the one that we'll be looking at today of data governance, data quality, data operations, effectively your life cycle, and looking at the platform and architecture that supports it, and certainly the other supporting processes such as marketing, training, and things that cross all of the other 5 areas. And if you've ever seen the diagram of a maturity model, it's typically in a situation of steps from 1 to 5. But I like the way the new diagram has been put together. You'll notice that it gets steeper as you try to get higher on the list. In the old traditional CMMI pictures, it looked like just a set of stairs that when you reach one level, it was just a matter of going to the next level. But what we have seen, certainly in the data management world, that most people tend to be at the 1 or 2 level. 1 is typically characterized by an individual person taking responsibility for things, the go-to kind of person. Level 2 is pretty much associated with projects. So you have some maturity in the capability, but they tend to be in an isolated area. And to say that you're at level 3 really means that you're doing it across the company or across some very, very large projects. So that curve gets steeper for the amount of effort it takes to get there. And interestingly enough, again, rather than just a process hierarchy, the DMM has this rather interesting, more looking like an ER diagram type of definition that says all of these basic areas are interconnected at a very high level. And the question has come up when we start to do assessments of the DMM is, can I not just do data governance? Well, you can, but the fact is that it's very interconnected with a lot of other things. And the one that we look at, particularly from the metadata perspective, is this notion of oversight. It's really the main connecting point between data governance and data quality. And if I were to characterize it, I would say that data governance is about form, about structure of data, and the data quality efforts are certainly much more about the content. But they all both have a very, very strict and very structured approach from the metadata perspective. So if we look at what metadata management is, go back one, and we look at the basic structure of the DMM, again, we have the 5 major processes and the supporting processes. But if we look specifically at the data governance area, we see that it is composed of governance management, a business glossary, and in fact, metadata management. Now, the argument has come up as business glossary. Gee, isn't that just business metadata? Well, frankly, it is, but the fact is we have such an issue between communication between business and IT that the technical and operational metadata really falls much more into the IT domain. And to separate the glossary out really gives a good deal of focus as we present this to executives to show that the business glossary is just as critical as in the number of other things that happen inside the IT metadata world. Then in terms of governance management, again, it's actually creating the programs, starting to look at stewardship, and all those process management things that are associated with doing data governance. But if we look at metadata management specifically, the definition inside the DMM says it's to establish the processes and infrastructure for specifying and extending clear and organized information about data assets under management. And that's the critical aspect that we want to talk about here, is the notion of its asset management. In fact, asset management has a long history going back to the early 60s as we started to look at numbers that run companies rather than the direct people that actually did the business. And you've seen that transition if you were around in the 70s and 80s, that we saw this management change to a numbers-driven organization rather than a pure process or experience-driven. So looking out one day, there was this pile of tires under the tree, and somebody asked, well, why are those tires there? And we spent a lot of money on them, some come, some go, but do we really know what we're doing with those assets, those tires? And from that, we started this rise of management-based information, MIS as we called it back in the 70s, that really started to speak about using ratios to understand and frankly measure how we were doing about this asset management. We saw return on assets, inventory turnover. So in the early 60s, what we saw was this family tree started to develop. And the first one was called MRP, which was Materials Requirements Planning. It was strictly about inventory. And that's an interesting concept, that the whole notion of asset management in the physical asset world started with the notion of asset management and an inventory. Well, that begat MRPII or MRP2. They kept the acronym but changed the words behind it, and it became Manufacturing Resource Planning. And I think you can guess where this is going to go next, that we started to look at other assets groups called ERP, CRP actually was called CRM, customers and crap are probably 2 words we don't want to use together. And that probably leads us to something we're headed into about the digital assets that we have, the data assets that we have, and are we going to call it something like data asset resource planning or something to that effect. So what we're advocating really is the notion of, if we're going to use the example of asset management, we should go along the same process that the physical assets went, and that the first concept is having that inventory. The second part of it, of course, as we saw, is you can't manage what you can't measure, and what we've seen is the development of the notion of business intelligence, which effectively took all of your data, did some massaging to it, put it in this central place to get it, and then provided a whole series of reporting for it. So that's effectively then how we started to manage by numbers and as we looked at things in the business. So the flow of the business, if you've ever done a dimensional model, the fact table virtually always is money that's flowing through the system. So from a BI or business information perspective, what we're looking at is the flow of dollars through a set of processes. But if we look at IT information, the question then is, what are we pumping through our veins, if you will, in the IT world? And frankly, it's metadata. So in the same sense that money is an abstraction of value in the business terms, the metadata is our abstraction of value, which is in fact the data. So if we want to look at it then, and we take out business and we put in metadata intelligence, what we now have is models instead of an ETL tool, and this takes the information from big data, from databases and ERPs, and puts it into our data warehouse, which is a repository. But the other advantage too is we can now link it directly to the business with a glossary and provide that exact same environment that the business has for managing and measuring their world that we can now do similarly for IT. Traceability, clearly very critical to understand, as we saw back in the days when we had the big scare over in England about meat. So we can trace it, you can trust it, and that's frankly what we're trying to achieve with the metadata and certainly with the repository of metadata. But the two primary questions that come from the business, either from a report or some other thing they've seen in their data systems, is what does it mean and where does it come from? Well, the what does it mean part is really about understandability. Because as we know, as we look at terms in any report or any column header, there are some synonyms and homonyms and what I like to call antonyms. As you know, synonyms and homonyms relate to words with the same meaning, different spelling, or words with the same spelling and different meanings. And I've found in our experience of building data and business intelligence and data warehouse that there are some semantics, some words, and some columns that are in databases that we frankly don't know why they're there, but nobody wants to mess with them. So they're a lot like antimatter in that respect. Where does it come from? It is traceability, plain and simple. So as we look at things and people wonder as they do the sniff test that doesn't feel right or doesn't seem right to them because we give them the drill down capability, we need to be able to, in a sense, defend the business intelligence by providing a way to do the traceability. So what does that look like? Well, really understandability comes from a semantic lineage, and I call that a vertical type of lineage, that you're going up and down basically from the business to IT and back again. And in the data movement side, we're really talking about data flow, which is more of a horizontal flow that we go from transactional systems through our data warehouse out to reporting. And what does it mean? Well, frankly, as we start to look at it, we want to look at it two ways. We want to be able to go backwards from any word that we find and trace it back to what the business definition is. But by the same token, we want to be able to go forward to say, is this used in other places? So the meaning and the critical understanding then becomes, from this point I am looking at this word, does this business semantic, does this continuity of business information flow any further? Where does it come from? Well, same thing. As we start to look at the data movement and we see this thing that is in the staging area of a database, we want to go back to where the information came from, but by the same token then we also want to know where it's going. This is fundamental from a third perspective, or a third question that is often asked, is not only where does it mean is where does it come from, but what happens if I have to change it? And that's probably the most critical thing we're talking about. The term, the only thing that is constant is change, surprisingly I found, was from a philosopher back in 500 BCE. So the concept of change is not a new thing, but it's our ability to respond to change, whether it's from an external pressure or an internal desire to change. It's a critical thing for us to understand. In point of fact, as we talk about value to the company and value to the shareholders, the capacity to understand the impact of change for a specific organization, I think in the future times, will become extremely valuable. So basically now, again, we have that business domain and technology domain, very much human-oriented in a glossary, words, terms of the business, and we have the computer-oriented side of things, which are databases. So how do we bridge that gap? How do we build a lingua franca? Well, very typically, we start with a conceptual data model, which does represent the terms, whether they're entities from business terms are in fact can be attributes as well that are defined by the business. By the same token, we've built most of the systems that we have today, so there's a great deal of importance of the physical data model that we reverse engineer. And we've taken a page out of some new work that's been done in the product management world to say that is this a top-down or bottom-up process, and the answer is yes. It is in fact a middle-out process. So if we go back to the notion of needing this lingua franca between the business and the technology, the logical data model becomes critical to that exercise because it becomes the common point between the business side and the IT side. And it's very important and critical to understand as we build these models, because all those things you see in the middle section there are all elements that we build inside the ERwin data modeling tool, but they go out to a portal that a lot of different people, both in the IT and the business domain, can have access to and understand. The problem is, of course, that if change happens, it could be something reactive. It could be in the side of the business that some government agency has requested that they do something differently. Or on the technology side, it could be, hey, we're shutting down Microsoft at level 6 of a database, or Oracle 8 is going away. So we have to understand what our consequences there are of change. But I think more importantly, we want to be more proactive to change. So for the business domain, it could be something like a merger or acquisition. And we want to see how that affects all the systems that we have today of the current company and the merged company. And it could be proactive as well on the technology side. We want to add social media to our world. How are we going to do that from an IT perspective? So it is all about change, and the value to the organization is to be able to understand the impact of that change and then proceed in an orderly fashion. So to do that, we've created this whole notion of a data management ecosystem that takes into account the business and the technical domains. And it really starts off from a top-down perspective with the business glossary. You see down at the bottom there, it's really business metadata that we're talking about. Now we start to add the technical metadata with the modeling tools, as we saw, with the conceptual, logical, and physical models, and it results in operational metadata, which is in the databases. But we want to extend that a little further now to be that lingua franca between the business domain and the IT domain. And in point of fact, we want to make it about application development. So the center core really is about creating and stewarding and providing governance for the master data that is common across the entire organization. In point of fact, we want to make sure that the data in systems, the transaction systems, use that metadata for systems that create data, and that's one set of data stewards that are responsible for things that actually do data creation. Well, the flip side of that is we have data out, which is about data consumption. And I would think that there's some stewardship responsibility there as well. To be honest, when we put data in, we should take into account the requirements of the data consumers. So in point of fact, we actually have two data stewards now. We have the data creation consumers and the data creation stewards and the data consumption stewards. And in point of fact, we have that third set of stewardships that's responsible for the master data structures, and I call them the governance stewards. The second part of this we want to look at is to then provide traceability. So if we build this ecosystem, then at any level, whether it's technical, operation, or business, we can see where things come from in terms of meaning. But by the same token, then, we can do impact analysis to understand that if some change happens anywhere in this ecosystem, we can understand from an impact analysis perspective what things need to change and how big the scope is. And then the third element, of course, we want to add operational responsibility in terms of traceability, and that becomes the physical data movements from the data creation systems to the data consumption systems. And there is that magic little diamond in the middle, frankly, which is the thing that turns creation data, which is point-in-time data, to consumption data or analytic data, which is point over time. And the last thing we want to consider as well, of course, is a lot of our data either is coming from partners or external sources, and we want to have that same level of traceability from a semantic and data movement perspective. So most of what we know about building systems comes from general systems theory, which is the early 60s, from this gentleman, Carl Ludwig von Bertalanffy, and he wrote this book called General Systems Theory. Well, from that book, the whole notion of IDEF, if anybody's done any process modeling, came about that said basically there are processes or activities, and there are inputs and outputs to those activities to which we need controls and mechanisms. And that became what was known as IDEF 0. It was part of ICAM, the definition, moderated by the Department of Defense in the United States, and it was because it became called the Integrated Definition of Processes and Computer Systems. And ICAM itself, of course, was integrated computer-aided manufacturing. So for a lot of years, we built systems this way, and data management typically was only concerned about what inputs were required and what outputs were required to build these applications. And again, that led to a lot of duplication and lack of reliability, because in point of fact, somebody's output is just somebody else's input. So when we talk about stewardship again from data creation and data consumption, the people who do the data creation do have to realize that their outputs are in fact the inputs to the data consumption steward. The other thing I think was missing that existed in that original theory was the notion of environmental feedback. That inputs, systems, and process outputs are not a vector. They're not a point that starts to the left and goes to the right, but there actually is a feedback loop, and I think to some degree in the whole notion of data management and metadata management, we've lost that. So what I'm proposing then is this whole notion of an enterprise feedback system now that takes that basic ecosystem for data management and then provides the feedback loop that the person who creates the data from a stewardship perspective uses in fact the same master data that the consumers who need the information can extract in the same way. And to provide that whole looping back to the business term, I think is the critical aspect that we're missing from the data management process today. So I mentioned before what we want to talk about with our metadata intelligence is providing the capacity to manage. Well, if we look at what a measurement is, it is an observed thing that happened measured against some standard. So for example, if your data quality is 50%, it means that 50 of the 100 observations that you made are not as good as we expect them to be. The curious aspect of measurement, however, is the standard needs to be consistent. You remember our good friend Spinal Tap, they said, well, we were much louder because all of our amplifiers went to 11. Well, how can you judge how loud they are if it's based on a 7 or 8 out of 11 versus 7 or 8 out of 10 as every other amplifier was? So that generally means that if you want these measurements to be valuable and provide you with the level of measurement, you need to have a standard. And we at Sandhill, of course, have a best practices process that we have called Enterprise Metadata Set of Standards that gives you a jump start to developing what those standards are to then be able to manage and measure. So how do we get started? Well, the first thing I'd like to do now is take you through how we can use the tools to get where we're going. And this is where I kick it over. I'm going to refer to Casey here. And basically it says you really got to know where you're going to get where you got to, but we want to show you the process of getting there. So Casey, I will pass that over to you.
Okay. Okay, what I'm going to discuss, assuming, all right, basically we're using ERwin here from a data mart perspective where we're creating a dimensional model and identifying all the sales facts over around the with the dimensions around it. And basically within ERwin, what you can do is you can actually go into the ERwin tool and edit the columns, and you can actually identify, if I look at the which items are being specified here from other systems, from the source systems. You can identify them and track them in here, and you can actually pull in tables and columns from other systems, as I can show here. In the order tracking system, we pulled in the customer table, the order shipment table, and the vendor table. And from the publication system, we pulled in a series of tables. And all these columns in these tables we want to use in order to do the mapping between the source system and the target system. And then at the end of it here, we can actually specify what we want the transformation rule to be, all right? So that's the whole idea of building the ETL process, if you will, from a source in any system here. This can be reported out in ERwin directly out of the report designer, but it can also, more powerfully, be reflected a web portal tool. And this is basically models that were presented or that were put together in ERwin that represent the application systems that you're working with, all right? That's the closest thing to the application system is a data model. as long as it's kept. And then you can go ahead and identify and provide information from a business perspective in terms of what information is that they are looking at here, so they can browse around here and look for things, okay? And find the metadata and work with it and gain that understanding that Don was alluding to gain the understanding and traceability backwards and forwards around where it is going, right? So we have a number of ways to be able to browse things here. We'll start out with the architecture diagram. And this simple diagram right here is identifying 4 application systems, okay? We have 3 operational systems right here that are feeding a target mark, right? And you can actually click on these objects and see exactly from ERwin about where this information is coming from, and you can drill into it as well, okay? And you can see all the information about the data model. Then you can open up the model and look at more details about it. And I see all the details about it, see all the tables and entities involved with it, look at the diagrams that are in that model to look at it from a graphical perspective or a textual perspective, as you can see here, okay? You can also, there's only a couple of different things to learn about this particular web portal in terms of browsing around. You can look at different data models. You can look at other things within the data models. You can look at all the entities, all the tables, the attributes, and basically all these links open up pages in the web portal that are very similar to what you're seeing here now in the background, okay? And you can actually do a search on objects as well, where you can actually do a search on any type of object, okay? You can say, give me all the objects that start with the term order, okay? For example, if I type in the word order here, or count, all right, I'll get a small couple of columns and attributes that have the term order in it, and there's a couple of columns from the physical perspective that has the order count in it. The order count is in the publication mark, and it's in the sales fact table, as you saw back over here, where we saw the in the model here. We've got connection. We have a sales fact entry in here. So suppose you are a BI analyst, and you're trying to figure out, okay, how does the order count get derived, right? Then you can go ahead and open up this model, and you can look at the order fact, sales fact table, or if you don't know or understand data modeling, you can just do the search and do a search on the count, and you'll find the order count right here, and you'll know from the BI tool that you work with that you're familiar with the publication mark, and you're familiar with the sales fact table, so you know that this is the order count you want to look at. So you can either look at the order count itself. Okay, if I click on that, you see all the details about the order count. There would be a definition here if this particular structure had a definition in the model, which I always emphasize that we need to remember to document what we put into ERwin. All right, this is a good example of what not to do here, but we should have a good definition in here, okay? And you can see all the details here, and we can back up a page and look at the sales fact table and see all the tables in here, or all the sales fact table. Oh, we're on the sales fact table, I'm sorry. And these are all the columns of the sales fact table, all right? And then you can see all the columns in here. And suppose you want to navigate throughout the whole system environment back to the source systems to identify how the heck did this order count get created, or how was it established from a business standpoint, or even from a technical standpoint. So the forward and backward buttons that Don alluded to earlier, we want to trace the lineage backwards. So we're going to select that option, and then we have a list of all that was tied together in ERwin to be able to identify exactly what's going on. Are we caught up?
Yep, you're live, Casey.
You can hear me okay?
Yep, we can hear you fine.
All right. Okay, so you can see all the details here, and you can actually download this from the web portal to study it offline if you need to, or you can look at it in a spreadsheet type format and see all the different fields involved, and what the lineage is, and the lineage context, okay? Or you can actually look at it graphically, which most people like to do. If you look at it graphically here, if I make this bigger so you can see it, you can see that the order count table, okay, has a number of different relationships tied to these three source systems. All right, the order tracking system, the old publication system, and the new publication system. All right, and you can actually expand all these very easily down to the feature level or column level, and you can see that the order count right here, you can actually highlight the path here so you can easily see it. The order count is derived from the ordering number in the order item table from the publication system, the schedule shipment date from the order shipment table in the old publication system, and the some kind of date. And this needs to be corrected. Okay, this is an error, but the order shipment table in the order tracking system. So these are the three source systems, and you can now see the connection there. Now what you can do is you can click on this order count and look at the property window here and see all the details about this order count that is that the data movement rule that you established in ERwin can be presented right here. So you can easily see it. Okay? And again, you can actually click on these fields right here, okay, these columns, to look at the actual definitions of the information that is available here within that model. Okay? So that's one way of being able to trace things backwards, according to what Don was saying. Let me jump to another tool, another configuration in here, and I'm going to log in as a different user for doing this. Now this particular user has access to a little more complex configuration here. If you look at this diagram, again, all these objects on this diagram are representing application systems. All right? And this right here, we have the accounts receivable application that is using the conceptual, logical, and physical capabilities of ERwin to be able to establish lineage among different data models. All right? And then again, we have the accounts payable system and the accounts payable adjustment system. So all these application systems are being used to feed a staging area. And that staging area is being used to feed a dimensional model, which is being derived to a vendor mark. Okay? Again, the person who is a BI person can investigate into the vendor mark and trace back how these columns are being derived all the way back to the three sources that you're associated with. Okay? And you can actually do all that within the web portal or within ERwin. Now, here's another example that may be worth mentioning here. Suppose you're the accounts payable system analyst, okay, from the technical standpoint or even from a business standpoint. And so you know a little bit about diagramming and you know the information that's available in the model. So we're going to open up that model, and you want to be able to change. You're noticing that the payment information, the payment amount, okay, or the payment amount field is getting kind of tight, and to feed the rest of the application downstream, the whole system downstream, you're a little bit worried about, okay, if I need to expand this in the operational system, I wonder how that will impact everything down the road. Okay, so we want to be able to investigate the amount paid field. So you can open up the amount paid field here and see all the details about it, but this time you want to investigate downstream or see what the data impact is if we change this particular field length in the application system, in the operational system, what kind of impact will it have downstream? So we can simply click on this option, and we can look at the graphical information that's available here, and we can see exactly how that particular column is being fed downstream. We can even highlight it, so you can see it very easily. If I select it, you can, we lock it. Okay, and then now we can see the, come on. I'm moving too fast, I apologize. Okay, so when you see the payment amount is being fed into the staging area, feeding the vendor payment table in the staging application. It's also feeding the vendor payment adjustments table, assignment table rather, and it's feeding these two fields in there. Then it's going further downstream, affecting the dimensional model as well as the vendor mark. So you can see how you can actually see that lineage, okay, a lot of that lineage within the the scope of what Don was talking about, to be able to communicate or be able to share with everyone in terms of being able to communicate and understand how all this data and all this metadata is tied together within the context of each application system. Okay, let's look at one more thing here, and I'll be all done. You notice this is a glossary. Okay, this is another object that you can use in the data governance edition of the web portal. What you can do is you can map glossary entries. If I open this up, you can see all the glossary entries that are associated, and you can see all the business rules, domains, naming standards, and that sort of thing that's available for this particular glossary. If we look at one of the categories here and expand it, these are all the terms that are being established within the glossary. Now keep in mind that you can pre-establish this glossary as a good starting point by populating it directly from an ERwin data model if you want to. Or you can populate it manually, or you can populate it via a spreadsheet type environment. Okay, and you can see all this information available here. If we look at the inbound page here, field here, you can see all the information that's available, and you can do the tracing in terms of the trace and semantic usage, which will show you all the information that's available in that particular from the glossary perspective. Okay, now you can see all the information and how it's being fed throughout the whole area into the data models that represent your application systems. Okay, and let's do a little search on the amount paid field here. Okay, and this is how other people look at it as well. All right. Now, whenever you see a result set here, based on the categories that you're doing the search on, based on these categories over here. All right. Whenever you're doing any a search on any of these categories, they'll be grouped based on the category name, and it'll show you the first 3 entries that are available, and then you expand it if you want to see more. All right. But we have all this information available here, and we want to look at the let's see, the amount paid. We want to see the semantic definition. Okay. What this will pop open is a little window here that describes. Whoops. Pop it open again. Show more. There we go. So this describes all the definitions in each of the application systems within the context of that application system, what these definitions are. This way, the data steward or the IT counterpart to the data steward, I forgot what the label is, but in any event, they can be working, they can see all these definitions here and come up with a decent term that makes sense to the whole organization. So it's an evolutionary process of gaining understanding from a data glossary perspective of reviewing the information that you have available to you very regularly here from each individual application system to come up with a good, a consolidated, concise definition from a data glossary perspective. And again, if they see entities without a definition in here, they know exactly which system to go to because it shows you the entity, the object, all right, and it will direct them to which system they need to be able to communicate with in order to get a better definition out of that particular support team to come up with the best definition for the term. So that in a nutshell is the kinds of things that we need to deal with from a data governance perspective in terms of collecting the metadata properly and being able to provide it to multiple kinds of audiences, both technical and business, to be able to communicate and understanding of the overall environment. And with that, I can turn it back over to you, Don.
Yeah, thanks, Casey. This is Robert here. While Don loads up the last slide, wanted to mention to everyone, if there is any questions, you can obviously use it in the chat box. I do want to thank Casey and Don for their presentations. This was if you want to call it a teaser. By no means does it to cover all the entire depth and breadth of the CMMI-DMM, Data Model Maturity, or the CA ERwin Web Portal. It is important to highlight that some of the features that you were seeing in the portal were part of the new data governance edition, and also it does rely upon the users having used source to target mapping in the ERwin toolset, as the portal will look at how it picks that up and how it references that metadata behind the scenes to be able to present that graphically. So with that, one of the things that we wanted to just kind of end with is an important aspect that as organizations go forward and try and leverage a better understanding of the technical metadata, we see it as a two-step process. One is understanding and having a process that will enable organizations to be able to outline a roadmap, and that's obviously where we come back to the CMMI data maturity model and the assessment. And the second thing is that obviously clients need tools in order to be able to do that. Those tools are obviously the CA ERwin data modeling tool with the CA ERwin Web Portal tool. If clients would like a more in-depth demonstration presentation, and Don, you can go to the next slide. What we're going to do is you can go through that. We've just talked about the maturity assessment as well. So if clients would like a further in-depth presentation on the CA ERwin Web Portal or understand the assessments, they can contact me, Robert Lutton, at Robert, R-O-B-E-R-T .Lutton, L-U-T-T-O-N at sandhillconsultants.com. Thank you, Don. We'll leave that there. We'll come up with your Tibetan proverb in a second or two. In the emails that we'll send out, we'll also send out a link that we created for a very in-depth demonstration of the CA ERwin Web Portal that people can see and wander through at their own leisure as well. So with that, I'd like to thank my presenters, Darius that was on the call, Don Soulsby on the call, and Casey on the call. And I don't see any other messages coming up in the chat, but if you do have any additional questions, please feel free to email them to me, and of course share the recording and the link that we will load up into our YouTube channel and share it with your colleagues as well. And obviously, Don, do you want to say your famous Tibetan proverb and leave it there?
I believe it's a very, very old thing to understand that when you start with something that's less than perfect and you look downstream and look for the gold nuggets when it's just mud at the top of the river, don't expect to find gold at the bottom.
So if upstream is dirty, downstream will be muddy. So with that, thank you very much indeed, and we'll be following up shortly. Thanks, everyone. Bye.